Okay, greetings to everyone in our session. Thanks for joining us. Thank you to Gemma at the JLE. Thank you to the JLE. And to all of you very interested persons joining our JLE session. Greetings to those whom I can see. Danny, definitely overdosing. Howard, Toronto, nice to have you with us. Hope the family's well. Avram, where are you, Avram? Are you in LA? Not sure. Shoshana, Eitan, Sasha, Elliot, nice to have my boys with me. Zev, Bogan family, great. Abramovs, Abe, okay. Elinata, nice to have you here. Okay, forgive me if I don't greet you personally. I can't see all the names, so you'll forgive me. Also, Adrian, greetings to you. Warren, greetings. And welcome to this session. When I look away, it's because I'm looking at your names on the side. So don't take it personally that I'm not looking at you. I look at you when I'm speaking, and I look at my chat box when I need to. Also, those who are watching on media other than the Zoom session, please remember that I cannot see you. I don't know that you are there, and I cannot see messages. So if you want to chat or ask questions, you need to log on through the JLE, and then I see your questions on the screen. Forgive me if I don't answer directly. Sometimes I don't notice it, or sometimes it's not directly on our subject. I do my best to respond to points that are raised, questions that are asked as well. Okay, are we all together? Give me a quick yes, please. On my chat me a quick yes, so I know you're hearing me. Okay. Good. Howard, okay. Shaw family. Ellie, nice to have you with us. And many other names. Okay, good. Kalatsky family as well. Nice to have you here as well. Okay, here's what we've been discussing. Let me remind you of our program. Monday nights, 9 p.m. UK time, we talk about the depth behind mitzvahs. Actions of the soul based on the classic work by the Tzemach Tzedek, which is called Derech Mitzvah Secho. On Wednesdays, we look not at actions of the soul, but thoughts of the soul. We look into the great, deep ideas behind Judaism, giving them as much depth as we can. And last week, we began probably the most difficult and deep and central of all Jewish, let's call it philosophical, hashkafic ideas, and that is the problem of foreknowledge and free will. And we began to see, as part one of this discussion, a number of approaches to that question. What I'm going to do now is give a very, very brief review just to note the question and a quick review of what we did, and I'm going to go into the next session of the discussion. Let me ask you a question, please, and just if you were not with me last week, okay, just type a quick no on the screen. I don't want to revise unnecessarily. Just give me a no if you were not with me last week. You were not part of this discussion. You did not pick it up. Well, my question to all of you is, where were you? Where were you? I see Shapiro's from Detroit here. Nice to have you as well. Okay, lots of people who are not here. Whoa. Well, I can't go over the whole discussion. So what I'll do is, Zev G, that's not an excuse on another shiur. You should have been on this shiur. Okay, let me do this. I'll give a brief introduction. You know what? I want to ask how many... Give me a quick yes if you were with me last week. Give me a quick yes, please. If you were together with me last week, give me a yes. Alright, long list of yeses. Okay. Paul, you were here but not all there. Yes, okay, me too. Alright, so here's what we'll do. I will give you a brief introduction. I'll spend a little bit more time on the question, and then I will try to give a very brief introduction. I'm not going to go over the answers that we gave last week. I will recommend only that you download last week's class. They're all recorded. Go to the JLE, download it, and you will get the first part of this discussion. There's a wonderful book that's been written on the subject, and that's this one. That's called Will, Freedom and Destiny, okay, by a great author, as you can see. And it's this book that I'm reading through, or at least using as my source. In this book I tried to assemble the classic sources, give them the best explanation that I could, and quote as many of the sources that I could. And Judy says she owns 3 copies. Great, thank you. Zevji, buy 2 copies. Yes, I agree. Adrian says he owns 4 copies. Whoa, that's wonderful. Okay, so let me suggest that you if you get a copy of this book, you'll have all the information in front of you. Howard, it's okay, your one is precious. I'm now doing this book in Hebrew. Mitzvah Shem, in a couple of weeks I'll be ready. And I'm doing the book in 2 parts for those of you who are interested. The first part is a translation of the English book, and the second part is a detailed list of the sources, quoting the sources. So when I quote unusual sources like Robona Crescus, things that are hard to find, you won't have to go looking for them. You'll simply have them at the back of the book, so you can read them for yourself, right? Of course, you need Hebrew for that, but that is what I'm preparing. So, Mitzvah Shem, that's what I'm doing. I just got an agreement from someone in the Bogan family. If you are offering to proofread my book, then I will be happy to send you some chapters. The book is called Will, Freedom and Destiny. Will, Freedom and Destiny. Okay, and you can see the picture on the cover is a picture of a road surface. A road, right? The road that leads to your destiny. This picture was taken by me. Right? The picture of the road here in London. And instead of the overworked image of a road forking into 2, I took a picture of the road itself. Anyway, I hope you appreciate that. See, the whole covers the stones of the road. But I hope you'll appreciate it. Anyway, so the question. Let me go through the question, please, and then we'll try to answer. Let me restate the question. The question is the clash between free will and foreknowledge, not destiny. I don't think I made this point last week. Let me emphasize it briefly. We do not talk about predestination in Judaism at all. Predestination, that's based on the concept of destiny. We do not believe in destiny. Destiny is a notion you find in Greek dramas, Greek tragedies. Thank you. I have an unnamed helper, unnamed, unspecified, very humble and modest helper who just handed me a cup of tea. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. The concept of destiny means that no matter what you do, the destiny will happen. We do not believe in that. We definitely don't believe in that. We believe that the future is open. Again, there are fixed points in the future, but I'm relating mostly to our day-to-day lives. The future is open. Not only that, we believe you can change a divine decree. It's a long and complex discussion. We do not believe in destiny. The classic example of destiny is Oedipus, who's predestined to kill his father and marry his mother. And no matter what he does, in fact, no matter how he tries to avoid his destiny, he plays into the hands of his destiny. We don't believe in a destiny like that, which would take away free will, or at least the effects of free will. But we do believe in foreknowledge. Predestination and foreknowledge are not the same thing. Predestination means it's destined, no matter what you do, it will happen. We don't say that. We say what you do makes the outcome happen, but God knew beforehand anyway. Okay, so we don't call it, we call it Yedi'ah and Bechira. Knowledge and free will. Foreknowledge. Now, here's the problem, and I'll state it as succinctly as I can. If God knows the future, it would seem to suggest that you have no free will. Okay, that's the point. If God knows that you will come to a fork in the road and choose right, there was no way you could choose left. Okay, I'll say it one more time. You are walking down the road today, and at midday you come to a fork in the road. Let's call it a moral fork in the road. You have to choose right or wrong, left or right. And you choose right. You could have chosen left, but you choose right. But God knew yesterday that you would choose right, which means left was never an option. He could not possibly be wrong in his knowledge, as the Rambam says. With unerring accuracy, he knew you were going to turn right, which means there never was a left possibility. That closes out your free will. Okay, this is a well-known problem, as I explained last week. This goes deep into the question of the question that general philosophers have asked. Aristotle deals with this question as well. Religious philosophers have grappled with this throughout the centuries. And that is the problem. So one more time, if God knows the future, in effect, that ought to close out your free will. How does it close out your free will? The usual way we formulate this question, and this is going to be very important for today's discussion, the usual way foreknowledge closes out your free will is because it closes out alternatives. Stay with me carefully on that. You think there are two alternatives, left and right. But since God knows that you will not go left, that never really was an alternative. So the reason that foreknowledge closes out free will is because it makes one of the options illusory. The left-hand option was an illusion. Okay, you never really could choose it. You didn't know that, of course. You felt like you were choosing. But actually, there was no way you could choose left, because God knew beforehand that you'd be choosing right, and therefore there was no real alternative. The alternative was an illusion. Okay, that's the problem. And I'm not going to emphasize explaining the problem any further, because I'm getting lots of questions here before we've even got into the subject. Let me appeal to you. Hold the questions and hold the comments until we've opened some new ears and heard some new material. Okay, not just a retreat into our preconceptions. That's a essential way to learn Torah. So that is the problem. How do we deal with this problem? Last week we went through some classics. I'll remind you, we said, without going into the details, we said Rav Saadia Gaon says, Rav Saadia Gaon, you're going back to the 9th century, 10th century, 9th century, Rav Saadia Gaon says that you do have free will, only God knew beforehand what you would freely choose. Can you begin to understand that? No, but that's what happened. That's what he says. You have free will, just God knew that you would freely choose right. He didn't cause you to choose right. He left right and left open. Left was genuinely open. You happened to choose right. And that's what he knew you would do. Okay. The Rambam deals with the problem and resolves it by saying it cannot be resolved. The Rambam says, Maimonides, born in 1135, died in 1204. The Rambam says that this is a question you cannot understand. And without going into the detail and explaining again what he says, I'll just point out what he does say. He says that your free will can certainly be understood. Definitely, you experience it, you make choices, you're responsible, you bear the consequences. But you cannot understand Hashem's foreknowledge. The reason, says the Rambam, in his classic exposition, is because Hashem and his knowledge are one. The knower, the knowing, and the known are one. Hashem is not separate from his knowledge like you are. You know something which is separate than you. There's your mind and what it knows. The one can come and go. The mind can be and it can know, cannot know, it can know and then forget. But Hashem and his knowledge are one. Hashem and his knowledge are one. The knower, the knowing, and the known. The knower, the act of knowing, and what is known are all one. And just like you cannot understand him, you cannot understand his knowledge. Some later commentaries say what the Rambam means is you cannot understand something that is known before the fact. You can't in human consciousness, we cannot encompass knowing something that hasn't happened yet. Okay, that's not something we can understand. The Rambam does not put it that way explicitly, but he says that you cannot understand Hashem's foreknowledge just like you cannot understand him. And therefore the axiom is you have free will and you can understand that. And somehow that you cannot understand, he knows beforehand what you will do. The Ravid, who often attacks the Rambam in extreme fashion, as we pointed out, does the same here. Here the critique of the Rambam is, he says, why would you raise a question and then fail to answer it? If you'll fail to answer the question, don't raise the question. All you do is leave me with unsatisfied doubts. That's what the Ravid says. And then he says, but now, Alex, you're asking a question about contradiction. I'm going to try to show you that there's virtually no contradiction at all. Yes, Esther, Ra'avad, yes, Avram ben David, yes. And he is bitterly attacking the Rambam. He says like this, if you're going to ask a question and leave me hanging, you've raised doubts that were unnecessary. It would have been wiser not to raise the question. And then he says, but now that and the Rambam elsewhere, by the way, writes that he would have preferred to remain silent, only this is a question that needs to be dealt with, you can't ignore it. The Ravid gives a different answer. I'll mention it very briefly. Again, I'm not doing justice to this part of the discussion. I can't repeat last week's discussion. The Ravid says that Hashem's knowledge is not causative. It's not a decree. When God knows that you will choose right, his knowledge is not a decree making you choose right. It's external to the events. External to the events. God watches you doing what you're doing, external to the events, past, present, and future. He doesn't interfere. If I watch a sequence of events, and I'm very wise, and I know exactly where those events will lead, with unerring accuracy, doesn't mean I caused them. If I watch a child crawling over to the fire, and I know the child will reach out for a glowing coal, I know it, and I'm accurate, doesn't mean I caused it. God is watching the world unfold. He's watching history unfold, before, during, and after the fact, and his watching is external to the events. Says the Ravid, like an astrologer. An astrologer watches astrological energies, spiritual energies coming down from the transcendental world into this world, and the astrologer watches their course. He sees where they're heading. You can see a physical object moving in a certain direction, you can predict where it's going to go. Right? The fact that you predict it from your knowledge of physics does not mean you caused it to happen. What's the problem? Right? As I explained last week, I used to live in a place where I could look down from my balcony on the second floor and see an accident, a motor vehicle accident, about 3 seconds before it happened. There was a point of inevitability where one car moving down one road got to a certain point where the speed that was happening at the time, there was for sure, with 3 or 4 seconds, there would be an accident, and I was right. I did not cause those accidents, I assure you. So a person with enough wisdom to predict a trajectory of events is not causing them. Hashem is wise enough to know, God is wise enough to know where these events will lead, and he sees them accurately. He's not causing them. And then the Ravid says, but this is not really a good answer. I'm only giving it to you because Rambam raised the question, and in case you need something to go on with, this is what I will tell you. I'm sure you can see the Rambam's objection to this answer. His objection would be, what do you mean God is external to the events? He is the events. He's the fabric of reality. He doesn't stand outside of things. There's nothing really outside of him. Okay, bear that in mind because it will come up again later. Now, we then looked at a few other authorities. The main two that we looked at, and these I will certainly not go into again, are the Ralbag and Robona Crescus. Rav Levi ben Gershon. Again, you're going back to two of the giants of Spanish Torah history, right in the 13th, 14th centuries, and the 1300s and 1400s. Sorry, 13 and 1400s. And these two authorities take what appear to be two extremely opposite views. And again, without explaining, the Ralbag says, very simple, God does not know the future. Hashem does not know the future. You can imagine the criticism that he suffered for saying that. We'll try to see what he meant and how the Kabbalists agree with him, but that's what he said. And of course, you cannot make statements like that without proof, and he brings plenty of proofs. The one I gave you last week was when Hashem asks Abraham, God asks Abraham, Hashem asks Avram to go through an ordeal of sacrificing his child. After he succeeds in that ordeal, God says, listen to this phrase, you're going to need it again in this discussion, Ata yadati ki rei Elokim ata. Now I know that you are a God-fearing man. Now I know. Very clearly implies, until now, I did not know. Right? Very clear. Listen to that phrase again. Ata yadati. Now I know that you are a person who fears me. That, says the Ralbag, shows that God did not know. I know it's strange. He was roundly criticized in many generations for saying this. But I tried to explain in great depth last week that this is nothing other than the Kabbalistic idea of God's withholding his knowledge. Right? This is part of a much bigger concept of Hashem withholding his being. In Kabbalistic jargon, that's called the tzimtzum. Right? God withdraws himself, so to speak. Yes, it's true that in the Zohar it says he fills reality and he surrounds reality. The bubble, the circle, the sphere of reality, Hashem pervades it, but he also surrounds it. He's Mesabev Kol Almin, he's around all worlds, and he's Mamale Kol Almin, he's in all worlds. Is that a paradox? Yes, it's the paradox of Hashem himself. But that is the case. And therefore, the aspect of Hashem surrounding all worlds, where he holds himself back, so to speak, to give a place for a finite world to exist, where his infinite oneness does not blow away the existence of the world. Similarly, he holds back his knowledge of events to give a place for events to take place. And he withdraws his knowledge, as the Kabbalists put it, right? He withdraws his knowledge and allows a space for free will to operate. Who says this most classically and clearly? The Arizal, the great Arizal, who says it absolutely openly, right? And the usual formulation attributed to the Arizal is, in the place where there's free will, there's no divine knowledge. In the place where there's divine knowledge, there's no free will. That's the classic formulation of the Arizal, right? In the place where God's knowledge exists, no free will. Not only no free will, there's no you. There's no world. There's nothing. There's only Einod Milvado, nothing besides him. But in your sphere of existence, in the place which Hashem has cleared of his own existence, so to speak, to give you a place to be, in that sphere of being, he does not know. He withholds his knowledge, and the Arizal brought textual proofs for it. We went into that last week. The Gemara in Perichelik says that Hashem withholds his knowledge from parts of himself. Lelibi gilisi, le'evarai loy gilisi. To my heart I have revealed the future, and not to my limbs. This is based on a verse, Ani yishena v'libi er. I am asleep, but my heart is awake. That's what God says of himself. I am asleep, but my heart is awake. My heart is awake, it sees the future. But my limbs, the manifest expressions of what I am, that does not know the future. Okay, that's the Ralbag, and again, criticized very heavily for many centuries after, even though the Kabbalists take that line for putting it that way. Robona Crescus, let's finish with that. That will bring us up to date. Rabbi Crescus, great authority, died in the 1300s. Crescus died, I think, in 1340, thereabouts. He writes that God does know the future, but you don't have free will. Obviously, he does not mean it that way. Obviously, you have free will. Without free will, there'd be very little sense of giving you commandments. You could not obey or disobey. Punishment itself and reward would be almost meaningless. But he does take an extreme view that free will is very limited. How does he deal with the question of reward and punishment? I tried to explain last week. Reward and punishment are not the consequences of what you do. They're the motivational elements. God offers you reward and threatens punishment to motivate you to do what's correct. Right? And you will respond to that motivation. And therefore they're not there for after the fact choices you've made. They're influences on your behavior. Okay. The most extreme view of Robona Crescus, which is perhaps the most fascinating aspect, where he does say you have no free will at all, is in faith. When you choose to believe in God, you're not choosing. You are forced to do it by your intellectual conclusions. He holds that the first mitzvah of the Torah, which is faith, emunah, is not a mitzvah at all. I am Hashem is not a mitzvah. Notice that the phrasing is not like the other commandments. You shall not. The first of the 10 commandments is phrased, I am. Statement of being. There's no commandment to believe. You can't command somebody to believe in you. If they hear you speaking, they believe in you already. If they don't hear you speaking, you can't command them. Again, you can't command somebody to think differently than he thinks. As I explained before, if you think this is white, okay, I can't command you to think that it's black. And by the way, it's meaningless to command you to believe that it's white either. If I take a white substance, right, it's meaningless to command you to believe that it's white or black. I cannot command you to believe that it's white, you believe it already. And I cannot command you to believe that it's black, you couldn't do that if you tried. And therefore, Robona Crescus says there's no possibility of choosing faith. How does he deal with the reward for emunah, which is the greatest of all the, dare we say, mitzvahs according to everyone else? And he says something exquisite here. There's a long essay on this. He says you are not rewarded for your belief. You are forced into your belief by intellectual conclusions. You're rewarded for your emotional response to that belief. When you decide that God exists and the Torah was given to the Jews at Sinai, you're forced into that by the evidence. How do you feel about it? That's your choice. Do you rejoice in it and feel the incredible privilege of what it is to be part of that nation that heard God speak at Sinai? Do you carry that torch with unbelievable pride and incredible joy and ecstasy? Or do you resent it, hate it, wish it weren't true, reject it, repudiate it, and do it with with resentment? That's your choice. That is your choice. The emotional response is indeed free will. Absolutely. You can tune yourself emotionally. You can choose to see your situation and respond to it well and pick it up. That's called being well adjusted, where you take what you're given and you work with it and enjoy your opportunities. Or you can look at the world that you were given and say, I hate this and I wish they were not the case. That is a choice you most certainly can make. That's Robona Crescus. Okay, let's move on. That was a very brief summary of the first part of this discussion. And again, to do justice to it, you need to go back and listen to that discussion. Give me a quick yes, please, if I may move on. Okay, let's move on. Now we get another list of commentaries. I'm going to pick out some of the later ones. And the most important one is the Arizal. Again, we're taking ourselves back to Robona Crescus does not deal with the question really. He doesn't really deal with foreknowledge and free will. No, he would agree with the Rambam at base. Yeah, indeed. He's just limiting free will altogether. He's not really doing it to solve the problem. Although he talks about foreknowledge extensively. But again, you need to go into his complex work. He wrote a complex work called Or Hashem, in which he deals with these things in exquisite detail. The most important authority going to the 1500s, 1572 was when he came to Tzfat, and 1574 was when he died, at the age of 39. The great Arizal, the Kabbalistic master, Yeshua Das Yachid Dani. The Robona Crescus is certainly an extreme. Absolutely, yes, absolutely, Robona Crescus. Many others, the only ones who echo what he said is a few of his students. But over the next couple of hundred years, you have people all the way down to the Barbanel who are quoting him, in many cases disagree with things that he said, and in some cases echoing elements of what he said. Yeah, there are others, to be sure, not the Rambam, but there are others who agree that the first mitzvah of the Torah, the first of the Ten Commandments, is not a mitzvah. Indeed, the Rambam says that it is, others say that it's not. That's a wonderful discussion in its own right. Danny, if you're interested, look up the Or Hashem in great detail, and there's a fantastic discovery made of the writings of the Robona Crescus in the last 10 years, I think, 20 years maybe. That's called the Drasha ala Pesach, in which he goes into this in great detail, academically printed in Tel Aviv a few years ago. Okay, so that's the Arizal in the last page of his famous work called the Arba Meot Shekel Kesef, a great, well-known component of his Kabbalistic writings, or teachings, shall I say. He says exactly this, that a person has no free will. There's no free will in the higher world, there's free will in the lower world. The example I gave you, I'll just repeat it briefly. The illustration he gives is that when a child is born, Hashem makes the child take an oath that he will be righteous and not wicked. Every human child, not Jewish, every human child being born at the point of birth in the spiritual world, before it comes into this world, is forced to take an oath. Swear you will be righteous and not wicked. We would call that oath a conscience. But that's the oath. Says the Arizal, when Hashem takes the soul of a child whom he can see will be wicked, how could he make an oath to be righteous? He's forcing a false oath. Now this is a very interesting insight. Arizal says Hashem is taking in his hand the soul of a child that he can foresee will be wicked, and he says, make an oath you will be righteous. God is forcing the child to make a false oath. That's not conceivable. And therefore, when he's making the child make the oath, God is not looking to the future. He's hiding his knowledge of the future. That's the Arizal, the Kabbalistic idea of God closing off a future option. Okay, let's move beyond the Arizal, and the next authority we come to is the Or HaChaim, right? The great and famous Or HaChaim. We're moving forward in history beyond the 1500s now. The Or HaChaim also agrees, as they all do really, if you look into this subject clearly, you'll see, they all agree that there's some withholding of a divine knowledge. In fact, many say that's exactly what you cannot understand about Hashem. What can you not understand about God? The fact that he can withhold knowledge from himself? Why do they say that? Because all the Kabbalists agree that the main thing you cannot understand is the Tzimtzum. How does God take himself away and create an empty space where he is not, so that he can create a world that is finite? No more difficult than that concept. But the Or HaChaim adds a detail. Again, a long discussion. I'm not going to go into in all the aspects, but he says something interesting. He says that Hashem withholds his knowledge only from the wicked, not from the righteous. That means the fact that righteous people, great tzaddikim, spiritual giants, they can relate to Hashem's knowing the future. They can know that Hashem knows the future. Hashem doesn't withhold his knowledge of the future from them. He only withholds his knowledge of the future from the wicked. Why? Because it's only the wicked who would say, I had no free choice, it wasn't my fault, I was born that way, it was predestined. Only, again, it's a fascinating distinction, says the Or HaChaim. Only a wicked person is going to hide behind divine foreknowledge. When he does a sin, what will he say? Wasn't my fault. You know, this is Rabbi Miller used to point this out. Rabbi Miller from Gateshead used to point this out all the time. He used to say, when you do a mitzvah, right, you take the credit. When you achieve something great, you take the credit. When you do something bad, you say, it's not my fault, I was born that way. You know, he used to give the example of a great academic who writes a book on free will. Great university academic. He writes a detailed book proving that there's no free will. Right? He proves it, he shows it neurologically, he shows all sorts of neurological experiments, and anatomy of the brain, and all sorts of human and animal experiments, and in an 800-page book, he proves absolutely categorically that human beings have no free will at all. And then people admire the book, and he takes the credit for it, right? He feels very good that he wrote a good book, and when people criticize him, he takes it very personally. What are you taking credit for? You have no free will, right? You couldn't choose to write the book better or worse. You couldn't choose anything. What are you taking credit for? Again, you just proved to the world that there's no free will, and therefore no reward and punishment, and no responsibility. Meantime, you take credit for writing a good book proving that there's no free will. Like, you're not thinking, okay? And so it's almost like people choose to believe that there's no free choice. Okay, that's a point that he makes very clearly. The Ohr HaChaim says that applies only to the wicked. And the reason is that only the wicked will hide behind that. Only the wicked will hide behind that, right? A wicked person is going to take credit when he does something good, and is going to deny responsibility when he does something bad. And therefore Hashem needs to hide his free will from his foreknowledge from the wicked to force them to take responsibility. But for the righteous person, he's not going to hide behind Hashem's foreknowledge, right? Hashem, if he hides behind, Hashem wants to give reward, okay? So when the righteous person does something, right, he's not doing it. The righteous are not going to hide behind the claim that I wasn't responsible. The righteous will take responsibility and they'll gain reward, and Hashem wants to give them the reward. Therefore, there's no need for him to hide his foreknowledge from the good, only from the bad. Okay, it's a subtlety on the Ohr HaChaim. You need to see the text that he brings this. Then I'm going to skip over a few of the commentaries. I want to just talk about the Shiur. The Shiur says something beyond amazing. Okay, for this you need to stay with me and concentrate, because we are going to look at something really interesting, but requiring great flexibility of thought. The Shiur, based heavily, we're talking about the Shnei Luchot HaBrit, right? The Shiur, he takes the view based on Kabbalistic sources, namely the Pardes Rimonim, which is one of the great Kabbalistic work by the Ramak, written in the 1500s. The Shiur takes the view that listen carefully, and please let me ask you to hold the questions until I've got through explaining this piece. In fact, I'll make a contract with you. I want you to type me a yes, agreeing that you will not ask questions for the next few minutes, okay? Give me a yes, please. Otherwise, I'm not continuing. Okay, thank you. I don't like to see questions being asked while I'm trying to explain something, and people attacking what I'm saying before I've had a chance to explain it. Okay, Michael, you can't make contracts, well, you have to remain silent anyway. See if you can understand what's being said here. Here's what the Shiur says. He says, what Hashem sees in advance is not the future, but all the possibilities of the future. He sees the future in potential. He sees that there's a right and a left. He sees all the options, and he sees the contingent options too. He sees that tomorrow morning you'll come to a fork in the road, and you could choose right or left. He sees all the consequences of choosing right, and he equally sees all the consequences of choosing left. And all the consequences of the consequences of choosing right, he sees those too. And all the consequences of the consequences of the consequences of choosing left, he sees them too. His computer is complex enough to see all the possible eventualities. I'm waiting to see who's going to break first and ask a question or make a criticism. If you do, you'll upset me. Okay? So stay with me here. What Hashem sees ab initio is a playing out of all the possibilities. He sees the future in potential but not in actual. And only when the future happens does he see it in the actual. In Kabbalistic terms, he sees the future at a level called Tiferet. Tiferet means a very high place in the Kabbalistic world. He does not see the future in Malchus. Malchus means the revealed final world. Only when the finality takes place, only when you make the choice and do the action, does his knowledge in Yediyah go back and affect his knowledge in Malchus, go back and affect his knowledge in Tiferes. Now I know it sounds bizarre, so just stay with me, let's speak it out. We're dealing with a very, very great mind here, based on very deep Kabbalistic sources. Let me speak out what he says. He bases this, of course, on a text. Nothing moves in Torah without a text. And when you see how he handles the text, you will find it almost impossible to move. He locks this into a text which is absolutely inexorable. Right? then virtually no other way to read the text once you see it the way that he demonstrates. So, and if you don't find this enlightening and exciting, there's no hope for you. Okay, so stay with me. If you've got any sensitivity for Hebrew text, okay, you'll appreciate this. Let's begin with this text. He says the Torah has a mitzvah, and in fact this is where his commentary is. It's in Dvarim 22:8, Sefer Dvarim Chaf Beis, Pasuk Ches, if you'd like to look it up. The Torah gives you a commandment to build a fence around your roof. Okay, a ma'akeh. Ma'akeh means a protective fence around your roof. We're talking about flat roofs. Right, if you go to Yerushalayim today in the old city, you walk around, you see that those buildings have flat roofs. They used to build their sukkah on the roof, and they used to use the flat roof as a living space. So the Torah commands you to put a fence around the edge of your roof so that people should not fall off. But standard, and from this we learn many preventive public measures of prevention, and the fact that you need to take great care with preventing harm to health, to life and limb. But the nature of the mitzvah is to build a ma'akeh, asita ma'akeh l'gagecha, make a fence around your roof. But here's what's interesting. The verse goes on to say, Shema yipol hanofel, lest the one who is going to fall, falls. Very interesting. Shema yipol hanofel. You need to put a fence around your roof to stop the one falling who will fall. Now, 1 second. Let's think about that. You need to build a fence around your roof to stop the fall of the one who will fall. Shema yipol hanofel. Says Rashi, listen carefully, Rashi's commentary. What does this mean? There's a person who's, dare I say, destined to fall. Rashi says, Ra'ui lipol misheshet yimei breshis. There's a person who is fitting, I hate to say the word destined, it's not the accurate word, but there's one who will fall that was known or set up in the 6 days of creation. Let's put it in simplistic English terms. There was one preordained to fall. How will making a fence help you with that? Stay with me carefully, this is amazing. There's a divine foreknowledge that this individual, Mr. X, will fall from a roof. But God commands you to build a fence to prevent him falling. How on earth can you prevent him falling? It's already foreordained, foreknown that he will fall. So listen to what the Shlosh says. It's not foreordained that he will fall. He's suitable to fall, fitting to fall, predisposed to fall. And again he uses a text. Look at Rashi's language. Rashi says, Hara'ui lipo, the one who is suited to fall. Ra'ui means fitting, suited, predisposed, likely, may well fall. Therefore, says like this, he may well fall, but don't let it be from your roof. You build the fence. He's predestined, preordained, predisposed, etc. Not a guarantee. What does God see about this individual? The possibility of his falling. It's only when he falls in the future that God sees it as an event in history. Until then he sees it as a possibility. Okay? So his text, he has a text. The text is very perplexing. The text says that Hashem sees someone's going to fall from the 6 days of creation and commands you to build a fence to stop him falling. Well, there's no sense in building a fence to stop something that's inevitable. You will not stop it. Says the Shlosh, the answer must be, he was predisposed to fall, likely to fall. It was a definite possibility for this individual, and you closed it off. So what Hashem saw was a possibility, and only when you prevented it did Hashem see the reality that he did not fall. Now, in case you think that's a little stretched, let me share with you a classic example of text. And if you have any Hebrew, if you know Hebrew, you will not appreciate this, unfortunately. And if you have no Hebrew, there's no way you can learn Torah. You need to start picking up Hebrew, your own language, so you can begin to understand Torah. But I'll do my best to convey the text and translate it for you. And this is beyond amazing. And I think you'll agree when you hear it. He says, when God told Abraham, Hashem told Abraham to sacrifice his child. Right? And then after the event, Hashem says, Ata yadati. Now I know you're a God-fearing individual. Listen carefully and observe very carefully what the words say. Ata yadati. What does that literally mean in Hebrew? Now I knew. Ata means now. Yadati, I knew. Means only when the event happens now does it go back in time and cause a foreknowledge. Again, when it happens in Malchus, which is eventuality in the world, it goes back in time and conditions a knowledge in the past. What did he tell us? That Hashem's knowledge is conditional. He sees the possibility of a fall in the future. That's called Tiferes in Kabbalistic language. When it finally happens, and it happens in the real world, in Kabbalistic language that's called Malchus. When it happens in the real world, it goes back and closes out all the other possibilities and leaves the one that's actual. But that only happens, Danny, well done, that you're allowed to comment. Now Danny speaks Hebrew, and so he understands the subtlety in the words. And Danny, how many times have you read that verse in the Torah? How many years have you attended shul and heard Dvarim learned and heard the Torah say, Ata yadati, now I know? It does not say now I know. It says Ata yadati, now I knew, but I only knew then because of what happens now. Echoes of Rav Saadia Gaon. Hashem knew beforehand what you would freely choose, meaning it's what happens in the future that causes his knowledge in the past. The future operates on the past in his world. Okay, I thought you'd enjoy that. Let's go a little bit further and see an application of this idea. Yes, you're allowed to say amazing. That you can say. Do not ask questions, but you can say amazing. Thank you. Wonderful learning Torah, isn't it? Beat's going to work, doesn't it? Of course, it pays to sit home in COVID isolation and learn Torah together. Of course. Okay, let me give you a couple of examples because this goes further. There are many examples of this type in Torah where there's something that Hashem sees in the future that in fact is on the one hand inevitable and on the other hand not. Let me show you how far this goes. I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. Here's one. Moses goes out of the palace and he sees a Jew being tormented by an Egyptian. He sees this Egyptian beating a Jew. His life is at stake. Okay, and so Moses, one way or another, kills the Egyptian. How does he kill him? With a special spiritual technique. He mentions a divine name. The Egyptian dies. Okay, after all, the Jew is being attacked. There's a self-defense or a defense of someone else. In Judaism, again, the obligation to preemptively kill someone who's trying to kill you applies even when you see a person trying to kill someone else. So here's this Egyptian torturing a Jew, and Moses steps in and defends the Jew, and in the course of doing so, kills the Egyptian. But listen to the verses. Danny, this is for you. Good. This is for you. It says, Vayifen koi v'choi. Moses looked this way and that way. Vayar ki ein ish. He saw there was no man, and so he killed him. Now listen well. The simplistic translation is he looked this way and that way, saw there was no man, and so he killed him. Simplest translation, he to look to see if anyone was around. That's not the accurate translation. The accurate translation is he looked this way and that. That means he looked in all sides of the future, saw that this Egyptian had no valid descendant, no righteous individual who would come out of him, and so he killed him. Meaning, had he seen that this Egyptian, when Shimi ben Gera attacked King David, right, and cursed him, right, cursed him, and David said, leave him alone. Deep commentaries say David saw who would come out of him in the future. Who would come out of him? Mordechai, as it happens. David could see that. Don't kill him now. Moshe looked into this Egyptian, and he saw that no spiritual person of valid descendant would come out of him, and so he killed him. Had he seen a future descendant who was valid, a spiritual person, right, who would contribute to the history of the world coming out of this Egyptian, he would not have killed him. But since he saw that no descendant would come out of him that would be meaningful and good, he killed him. Do you see the philosophical problem? There's an amazing philosophical question here. The question is, of course nothing good can come out of this Egyptian. You're about to kill him. In English you call this a self-fulfilling prophecy. Again, let's get this clear. You have to appreciate the question, right? When you see this first, it's an incredible question. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses looks at this Egyptian. He wants to know, should he kill him or not? If he will have a valid descendant, somebody spiritually positive in the future, he won't kill him. So he looks deeply, prophetically, into the soul of this Egyptian, sees the future history of the world, and sees that no one will come out of him that is good. So he kills him. But of course he sees no one will come out of him. He's about to kill him. And since he's about to die in 2 minutes' time, of course there'll be no valid descendant. Right? How could he have possibly seen a good descendant coming out of somebody that is predestined to kill in the next moment? Please give me a quick yes on the screen if you understand the question. no point answering if you don't understand it. Great question, right? Agreed? Great question? Good. Listen to what the Shlo is explaining. He says that what Moshe Rabbeinu sees is the potential future, meaning he sees all the avenues of possibility and none of them include a righteous descendant. He doesn't see the future. He sees the pathways of possibility, and in this particular case there's no option of possibility. Let me put you slightly differently that you might find a little easier to grasp. What he does is he looks deep into this Egyptian soul, and in him now he sees no seed of goodness. He looks into this Egyptian now, and in him now he sees no possibility. There's nothing in him now that can come to fruition in the future as a righteous individual, and that's why he kills him. To reinforce this, let me give you another. That's wonderful. I hope you'll enjoy that book. Meantime, I hope you're enjoying this discussion as well. Let me give you Chizkiyahu. Danny, let me think about that. Chizkiyahu sees that he will not have children. That's not talking about Hashem's knowledge. Chizkiyahu sees that he will not have children, and that's why he does not get married. And there Hashem says to him, never mind what you see, it's what I see that's important. That's a different discussion. Right? It needs discussion as well, but it's not this one. Of course Art Scroll translate Ataya Dati as now I know. You can't say in English now I knew. You can't do that. Of course they can't. They translate what's called Pshat. Right? But if you look into accurate Pshat, this is what it means. Oh, Howard, beautiful. Oh, you made my day. Howard in Toronto, you made my day. So indeed, that's the second example, and I'm about to give it. Hagar is sitting in the desert. Her son Yishmael is dying of thirst. You know the story? He's dying of thirst. The water in the canister has emptied. There's no more water. She's sitting at a distance not to actually have to watch him die. Yishmael is dying of thirst. He's a young lad. And Hagar is sitting there, right, agonized over the fact that her son is about to die. At that point, God decides to perform a miracle. The miracle will be producing a lake of water that she can go and take and feed her child. Actually, technically speaking, God does not create a lake. He simply opens her eyes. This is a fantastic message for another discussion. But it says, Vayifrach Hashem. Hashem opened her eyes and she saw the water. And many commentaries point out, Hashem did not make a miracle of it, producing water. He just opened her eyes. The water's there, just that you can't see it. The spiritual world the reality is present. The problem is only we just don't see. When Hashem wants to make a miracle, that you should have water to drink, He doesn't miraculously produce water. He just opens your eyes. The miracle is that you can now see. Beautiful, it's explicit in the Torah. But anyway, that's not our point. Now listen carefully to this. As Hashem is proposing creating the water, or the miracle of the water that the child shall survive, the ministering angels object. The angels object. The angels that represent din, justice, strict justice, they step in. They say, God, you're about to save the life of a child whose descendants will kill the Jewish people. And when will they kill the Jewish people? The incident that the angels specified was when the Jewish people are going into exile and they pass through the lands of Ishmael, the Ishmaelites will come out and refuse to give them water when the Jews are dying of thirst. They're going into exile, dying to have a drink of water. And the Medrash says what happened. The Ishmaelites came out and they gave them big bottles that looked like they were full of water, but they were full of compressed air. And when the Jews put them to their mouths and started to drink, the air rushed into them and killed them. Okay, so you're talking about tremendous cruelty, and these are the Bnei Ishmael who will refuse to give water to your children and in fact cause them to die in such circumstances. Why are you saving this child? Again, listen to the claim. The angels look into the future. Being angels, they can see the future. They see that the future will come out of this child, will be a future of cruelty, denying the Jewish people water. And God, they say, you now want to give this child water and sustain him. Look what the consequence will be for your people that we can see in the future. So God says, I judge him b'asher hu sham. Answer me a question, angels. Is he righteous now or not? They say, now God is righteous. He's a child. He's a blameless child. He's not a wicked person at this moment. But we see the future. God says, I judge people as they are now. I judge people as they are now. Now listen to the question. Here comes the question. The angels see a future. Listen, this is an amazing version of the question. Another version of the question. The angels see a future in which Ishmael's descendants will be cruel to the Jewish people. So they say, Hashem, kill him. How can you kill him when you've seen the future in which he lives? Again, the angels see a future. What is the future? Ishmael grows up, he has children, his children have children, they form a nation, and those people are cruel to the Jewish people. You've seen it. You've seen the future. You've seen a reality. You've seen him live and produce a nation. Now you're applying to God to kill him now. How can you apply to have something done now that controverts what you see is not that in the future? Right? Again, give me a quick yes if you see the question, please. That's a fantastic question. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Darren, excellent, excellent, good. What's the answer? The answer is the angels see a potential future, but it's not a real future till it happens. Let me put it a slightly different way. They see in the essence of this child at the moment a cruelty that could very well lead to a nation that will kill the Jewish people with cruelty later. They see that incipient possibility, dormant or inherent in him now. Or in the Shlo's language, they see an option for the future. Does it mean that's the only option that will happen? No, the other options too. Ishmael could turn out to be good and not have descendants like that. His nations, his grandchildren could decide to be kind to the Jewish people and make peace with them. And then God would have known that would be the reality in the past. And therefore, you see the Shlo's line of thinking. It sounds bizarre when you begin, but you see, indeed, of course it's like the Mitzri. Why do you think I'm giving you this example? Of course, another example of the same line of thinking. Okay, now, let me go to one more. Again, there's so many more commentaries to pick out. I'd like to deal with one more, because this raises a very, very amazing issue. And we'll make this the last of our insights, and to see more you need to read the book. Say it again, this is the book. No, this has nothing to do with the double slit experiment. Nothing to do with that. Well, it has. The only thing it has to do with it is that there is a nature of physical reality that takes its form from observation, even though that's not understood in physics. Indeed, you are correct about that aspect. Gabi, let me think about that. Gabi Perelman, young Rabbi Gabi Perelman. Can this shed light on a Ben Sori Moire? Nidal Shem Sefer, let me think about that. Is Nidal Shem Sefer? That's a fascinating question. See, the problem with that is, this child is punished now and his life is ended. Not child, this young man. His life is ended now because God can see that he is wicked. So you'd like to say something like this. He sees the root of wickedness in him. Not an inevitable possibilities. But that root of wickedness in him now is enough to have him killed now. Gabi, I need to think about that. That's a great question. You know the Gemara says it never actually happened. So there's an educational message here. And if you take that pshat, that it never actually happened, I'm not sure we have to grapple with our problem. But it could be that what you're raising is a key to thinking about that peculiarity. Yes, I can only assume that your good wife Devorah has helped you ask that brilliant question. The great question, yeah. Okay, let me think about that. I'll come back to you on that if I can think through that a bit more deeply. Let me share with you one last insight here, which is beyond amazing. Okay, let me do my best to explain it. In all this discussion, there's been one assumption, and that assumption is that free will requires alternatives. Okay, stay with me, because this is when you grasp what I'm about to say now, it'll probably keep you up all night, and I hope it does. Well worth thinking about. But free will has always been assumed throughout all of history, all of philosophical history, in Aristotle, and in Jewish sources. Free will is always understood to mean that there are alternative possibilities. You come to a fork in the road and you have two alternatives, sometimes more than two. But let's take a simple example. You can choose right, you can choose left. Do you agree, right? Stay with me carefully. Do you agree that you need alternatives for free will? Let's say you come to a road and you come around a curve in the road and you see the road goes straight and there are no alternatives. Is there any choice to be made? Give me a yes or no. There's only one road. Can you make a choice? No. Excellent. Well, how can you make a choice if there's only one road? How can you make a choice of right or left if there's only one way? I didn't ask you whether you can go or not go. I asked you, can you turn one way or the other when there's only one road? No. Okay. Now, no, I'm not asking you for either you can lie down and die, you can stand on your head. I'm asking you, can you turn to one side or the other where there's only one side? No. So in order to listen, stay with me carefully. In order to have free will, you need alternatives. If you come to a fork in the road, and there's a right and a left, then you have free will. What we call free choice. You can only choose when there's more than one choice. So, again, I'm going to ask you to respond to me because I need to know you're with me. Otherwise you won't understand the issue. In order to have free will, you need alternatives. You can't make a choice between two things if there's only one thing to choose. So in order to have free will, there must be alternative possibilities. Give me a yes if you agree to that. Okay. Now, in the last few years, beginning in the 1960s, that assumption was challenged. I hope we'll have time for me to tell you where this finds expression in Judaism. If I fail, I apologize. But let me try to explain at least the issue in objective terms before we see where this has its equivalent in Torah. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman speaks about this. Oh, let me start with him. Rabbi Chanan says, listen to this. In order to have free will, you do not need possibilities. Of course, you need to think that there are. But you don't. You need to think you're making a choice. But you don't need possibilities. He says this, when Samson married Delilah, a Philistine woman, did he choose to marry her? Yes. Was he punished and suffered because of that? Yes. Did he take responsibility for a free will decision that he made wrongly, and was he punished? Yes. But the Pasuk says, but he did not know that the matter came from God. The Pasuk says quite openly, Samson did not know, or his parents did not know, no one knew that the matter was preordained, that he had to marry that woman. There was no option not to. Means the Torah is telling you that a person did something that he chose where he had no option not to choose it, and he's accountable. Meaning, if you make a choice, listen carefully. No, Danny, no, I'm not talking about that at all. Stay with me carefully. If you make a choice, perceiving a choice, you think there's a left and you think there's a right and you choose right, and it turns out there never was a left at all, you're still accountable. Now, let's take this. By the way, the Rambam doesn't agree with this. The Rambam says that in Torah there are genuine open possibilities, completely open possibilities. God just knows which one you will choose. But Chanan Wasserman is saying you don't need a genuine open possibility. He's not disagreeing with the Rambam, he's just making a point. If you think there's a left, but in fact there's only a right, and you choose right, you never tried to choose left, you're accountable. Let me tell you, this has nothing to do with destiny. Let me give you an example. In the 1960s, there was an American philosopher who shook up the whole world of moral philosophy. I'm not going to go into names and details. There are many books written about this, but I'll just give you the construct that he proposed. His name was Harry Frankfurt, again, without going into the details. He says this. Stay with me carefully. Imagine a person is put into a situation where he has no option. He has no option to choose differently. Be careful, I'm not saying he has no option. He could not choose differently. I'll show you that he's still accountable. Listen to this outrageous claim. I will show you a person caught in a situation, a human situation, where he makes an immoral choice, in which he had no option to choose morally. No option. Not to act. Not even to choose morally. And I'll show you that he's accountable. Does that sound impossible? I think so. Here's the challenge. I will show you a situation in which a certain person will choose an immoral act. He'll choose to murder someone. I will show you that he had never had an opportunity, no option to choose differently, could not have chosen differently. And I'll show you that he's still accountable. Okay? Sounds unfair? Sounds impossible? Listen to his proof. Yeah? Query? Correct. Listen to this. I'm telling you, when this was proposed originally, it turned the whole field of moral philosophy on its head, and dozens of books have been written since then, arguing for and against this proposition. Listen very carefully and objectively. Clear your preconceptions, please. No thoughts behind this. No preconceptions. No judgments. Okay, Shuni? This is for you. Okay? Was named Tuchot. Okay? No preconceptions. Not Buddhist and not anything else. Nachon, beseder, yes? Stay with me. Good. There's Mr. A, Mr. B, and Mr. C. There's Alfie, Bobby, and Charlie. Good, Shuni, excellent, brilliant, I appreciate that. There's Alfie, Bobby, and Charlie, A, B, and C. Now listen carefully. A wants C killed. Mr. A wants Mr. C killed. He wants him to be shot dead. But he doesn't want to do it himself. He wants Bobby to do it. A wants B to kill C. Okay, clear? Good. See, here's what A does. Listen carefully. Mr. A, Alfie, has a friend who's a very, very good neurosurgeon. He gets his friend to climb into Bobby's house at night when Bobby's asleep and secretly and silently operate on his brain. And in his brain he plants a little electronic receiver. Now this receiver is a very, very clever device. Listen carefully. This receiver can make Bobby choose what Alfie wants him to choose. I didn't say it make him do what Alfie wants him to do. It makes him choose what Alfie wants him to choose. Can you accept that? I'm not asking you if this is possible. Okay? This is what we call a thought experiment. Now listen carefully. That little receiver in his brain is wired up electronically with a radio-controlled transmitter. Alfie holds the transmitter in his hand. The transmitter has a button. Listen carefully. When Alfie presses the button, it causes Bobby to choose to kill Charlie. Is this clear? Is the scenario clear? Let me say it one more time. Alfie's holding a transmitter. If he doesn't touch it, it does nothing. The little transmitter remains dormant, does not operate at all. But if Alfie presses the button, the thing goes bzzzt, and it causes Bobby to choose to kill Charlie. Clear? Okay. Next morning, Bobby wakes up, gradually walks over to Charlie, reaches for his gun. Now, Alfie's hoping very much that Bobby will kill Charlie. But he very much hopes it will happen. He doesn't want to press the button. He wants Bobby to choose to kill Charlie. He watches carefully from a distance. Bobby takes out his gun and shoots Charlie dead. Alfie never touched the transmitter. Now listen carefully to me. Did Bobby choose to kill Charlie? Give me a yes or a no. Yes. Is Bobby accountable for killing Charlie? Is he accountable for it? Yes. Did he make a choice to kill Charlie? Yes. Is he guilty of murder for killing Charlie? Yes. Did he have any option? No. Because if he would have been about to choose not to, Alfie would have pressed the button. Which means Bobby had no option. His only option was to choose to kill Charlie. He had no other option. Either he chose it, or had he been about not to choose it, then Alfie would have caused him to choose it. Which means he had no option but to kill Charlie. However, in the event, Alfie never pressed the button. So Bobby killed Charlie, and no one forced him to. He chose to kill Charlie, which means he has free choice and accountability with no alternative. There never was an option not to. Because had he been about to choose not to, Alfie would have pressed the button, closing out that option. Of course, Warren, he didn't know. Of course he didn't know. Indeed he didn't know. I'm talking about you know or not. He knew, as far as he's concerned, he had a choice. He made the choice. But there was no alternative. All we're trying to prove is you don't need alternatives to be accountable. Let me ask you that question, Eli Natan. I don't like that question. So I'll ask you. Would Bobby have been accountable if Alfie did press the button? You tell me. Everybody, I'm asking you a question. If Alfie pressed the button and forced Bobby to choose, would Bobby be accountable? Of course not. Of course not. He was forced. But Alfie never pressed the button. Shuni, your conclusion is wrong. He had free choice. He just never had an alternative. Okay. We've gone a little over time. But that is the suggestion. The Rambam holds this is all irrelevant. Let me say that again. The Rambam holds you have alternatives. They're both open. The Shloh holds they're both open. And God himself withholds his knowledge from the options. Nobody forces you. Only after you do it, turns out that Hashem already knew what it was that you would do. Whether you have options, alternative or not, is irrelevant. Anyway, that is the discussion, a brief overview of our discussion of foreknowledge and free will. In Yetz Hashem, Monday we'll get into mitzvahs. Again, and next Wednesday, Mitzvah Hashem, we'll discuss another deep idea in Judaism. Thank you, Gemma, and thanks to all of you. Have a wonderful week and a sleepless night.